Can't believe I'm about to say this, guys, but for the first time in 25 years, Suzuki might not be giving us bold new graphics for the DRZ400. We might actually be getting a brand new DRZ for 2025. But before you quit your job and streak down the hallways naked in celebration, let's look at the details and try and figure out where this information came from, how solid is that information, and lastly, is there actually a possibility that we could see brand new DRZ400 for 2025. I think we can trace back the beginnings of these rumors to Japan. Some outlets have some amazing scoops and really grab onto details that you never saw coming, and other times it just seems to be computer generated crap all made up for clicks. So I didn't jump on the story because I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but it seems this originated in Japan quite some time ago, where there were claims that they actually got R&D documents from Suzuki, and places like Webbike in Japan report on this quite some time ago. Where it started to get really interesting was with ADV Rider, who were quite on top of this and reported that strangely the DRZ was actually missing from Suzuki's registration of new models for all the EPA regulations in the US, which is an odd thing. It's not necessarily something that proves that we'll get a new DRZ, because it's certainly not a complicated process for a bike that's existed for so long for Suzuki to send it in at a later date. But it is odd that it is left off the list when Suzuki has done pretty much all of its other models for the year. So the question was asked, why have Suzuki left that off the table? And ADV Rider's thought was, well, the possibility is that we could be seeing a new model. Now, at the time, they didn't know how much of a new model, whether it was going to be bold new graphics and maybe a few different accessories bolted onto it to call it a special edition. Like here in Australia, they had the Cape York edition. That's the edition I purchased, where you got a bash plate and handguards and a few other nice little features as extras to sweeten the deal. So it could have been that possibility. But ADV Rider also suggested that this could actually be a brand new DRZ400 that could come out of this. A slim possibility, but a chance. And it looks like that prediction is getting stronger by the day. Because what happens next is motorcycle.com gets their hands on patents of what looks like to be a Suzuki DRZ400 with electronic fuel injection. And the clincher here is how similar in the patent designs this engine is to the current DRZ400 engine. In fact, it's basically a carbon copy, and if you look at the picture, these look like identical engines, of course with a few differences for these new patents. So the two patent applications at the US Patent Trademark Office, their patents are for the design of this electronic throttle control, which of course the DRZ wasn't originally designed for, so clearly they will have to make changes and modifications to the bike, hence the new patent. So this confirms that if there is a 2025 DRZ, that it most certainly will have EFI. Of course, if there was a DRZ with major updates coming, it would have to, because there's no way a carburetor bike would get through such strict EPA regulations as we have today. And it looks very similar to Suzuki's RMZ line. The exhaust system also looks different in the patents. Now that makes sense as well, because the routing will probably have to be different for this exhaust system. And motorcycle.com are saying that's because of the new throttle body, and it also looks like there's a different muffler on here as well. And realistically, that's about all we can tell from the patents. But there's also an awful lot that we don't know, and we need to list that off. We don't know if this is even going to be 398 cc's or not, or whether Suzuki are actually going to have to bore this bike out a bit more to offset the EP regulations strangling the power of this bike, so that it offers the same or a little bit more performance than the current DRZ400. We don't know anything about the transmission, so there's nothing here to indicate whether you will get the current 5-speed gearbox or whether we'll finally get the 6-speed gearbox that so many DRZ owners have been asking for. I'm on the fence here as to how that will happen, because we've got evidence like the KLR 650 that got updated with EFI and re-released as a Gen 3. It still had the 5-speed gearbox, and a lot of that has to do with changing the gearbox on a bike with an existing engine and gearbox setup is a huge amount of work. It would really require drastic changes, and Suzuki might not be up for drastic changes on such an affordable motorcycle. But maybe Suzuki can tweak the spread of that 5-speed gearbox to better accommodate more riding situations. So while I would love to see 6 speeds, and I really hope that that is what happens, I also think it would be fairly likely that Suzuki could go the easy route and just stick with the 5-speed gearbox that it already has. ABS is another one. We don't know whether this bike will have ABS. I think one of the strongest arguments is the timing here, not only because in 2025 it's going to be the 25th anniversary for the DRZ400, and what better thing to celebrate 25 years of production than to release a brand new model. It just writes the headlines itself, doesn't make it a certainty. The logic certainly follows through. The other part of this timing aspect is where the market is at now. When the DRZ400 came out, 650s were the king of thumpers and the off-road world. The 650s are getting rarer and rarer by the day. And smaller dual sports are far more popular, not only in the Western market, but in the Asian market as well. So Suzuki have probably looked around and gone, you know what, we don't really have a small displacement dual sport for the modern era. So maybe they finally thought, you know what, we have this bike, with EFI and some modifications, we could get it past all the regulations, give people what they've been asking for so many years, and be competitive back in that side of the market again. I think that logic could also hold out under scrutiny as well. The frame and a lot of the components look very similar to what's on the current DRZ400. And some people might roll their eyes that Suzuki might not be putting in enough effort if this bike ever does come to fruition. But what I can tell you as an owner of a DRZ, Suzuki just thought about this bike being worked on by mechanics in their home garages. This by far was my favorite bike to wrench on. Everything was just so easy. So I think it's actually a benefit if they stick to a lot of the original design of the DRZ400. If it's not broke, don't fix it. The frame is sturdy and solid, well designed. A lot of the features of this bike I really like, the easy access to the airbox and the filter changes. So I don't think they need to reinvent the wheel, and I actually think it's a positive if they don't do too many big changes to the bones of the DRZ400. When you think dual sport, it's hard not to think about these bikes. So I think making a modern one for the modern era, for the younger generations that are coming up and getting into dual sports, as well as the people that are already riding that just want a few tweaks to a fantastic design, I think it's a great move. So my list, as I said, is EFI, which we know we're getting. I think 6 speeds would be fantastic, but at least address the spread on the 5-speed gearbox if you're not going to do so, and switchable ABS. Those are the features I would like to see. Other than that, I'd be happy for Suzuki to keep it exactly the same, maybe an LED front headlight, and call the job done, because the rest is a solid foundation. But I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think these patents are very encouraging that Suzuki will actually release a 2025 Suzuki DRZ400? Do you think we'll be getting an E, an S, and a Super Motard? Of course, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. And as always, guys, don't forget to stay shiny side up.